You know that saying, don't repeat yourself? Like, I've always thought of it like this golden rule of coding. Why write the same code twice when you could, write a single reusable chunk, right? It
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
But I recently stumbled on this whole idea of wet code bases, and it kind of flips that whole idea on its head.
Right.
And it's got me thinking, like, rethinking what I thought I knew about efficiency in coding.
Yeah, it's really interesting how we're almost conditioned to think that DRY equals good.
Right.
And it is a great principle,
Yeah.
but as with many things, you can take it too far
Yeah,
and it can have unintended consequences.
totally. So before we dive into this wet and wild world of embracing repetition, can we at least, like, get on the same page about DRI? Just so we're all good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At its core, the DRY principle is about avoiding unnecessary duplication in your code.
Okay.
It's about promoting those reusable components, functions, so you're not writing the same lines of code over and over and over again.
Yeah, less code, less repetition. Sounds like a win-win, right?
Right. But this laser focus on eliminating all repetition can sometimes lead to what we call accidental coupling.
Accidental coupling. Okay, now that sounds kind of ominous. I don't know. What is that?
It can be.
Uh-huh.
So imagine you have all these different parts of your code, and they're all interconnected in this really intricate way,
Yep.
all in the name of avoiding repetition. Everything seems super efficient until you need to make a tiny little change in one place.
Oh.
And then suddenly that change, it's like a ripple effect, it can cause all these unintended consequences in other parts of your code that you wouldn't think are related.
So it's like, I don't know, like switching a light switch and then accidentally causing a power outage in the whole neighborhood. Is that like a bad analogy?
There's a perfect analogy.
Okay, good.
Yeah. You've basically created this house of cards, and even the smallest tweak can bring the whole thing tumbling down.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the downside here. So is wet about finding, like, a happy medium? Like, how much repetition is too much, and when is it actually good?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. This is all based on a talk by Dan Abramoff,
Okay.
and it was unpacked brilliantly in a blog post by Tu Wen. And what's fascinating is that Abramoff argues that sometimes a little weightness, and we're talking like write everything twice,
Yeah.
can actually lead to a more maintainable, understandable code base in the long run.
Write everything twice. See, now that sounds almost rebellious.
Right.
So it's not about just, like, writing bad code or being lazy. It's more about being, like, strategic with it, right?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that developer time is so valuable,
Right.
and that sometimes it's better to waste a little time up front writing things out explicitly
Yeah.
if it's going to save you from a world of pain and debugging later on.
I like that. Wasting time strategically.
Yes,
It's like investing.
exactly.
You're investing a little bit more upfront to avoid the cost later down the line.
Yeah, exactly. And so to kind of illustrate this point, Hun uses this really compelling example in the blog post
Okay.
of the evolution of a simple function called async task.
Okay, so let's unpack async tasks. For those of us listening who maybe don't, like, dream in code, what are we talking about here?
Sure. Imagine you're ordering food online,
Right.
And you're checking out. You wouldn't want that website to freeze up while it's like processing your payment, right?
Right.
So that's where async task comes in. It's basically a piece of code that lets the website handle your payment in the background or asynchronously while you keep doing whatever you're doing on the website.
So it keeps things moving smoothly in the background. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Have a feeling this async task is about to take a turn for the worse, though, right?
It always starts so simple, so elegantly. This async task, it does its job. But then as the project grows, someone says, well, what if it could also handle these synchronous tasks
Oh.
that need to happen one after the other? So they add a little tweak, just like a little flag
Oh, no.
that lets it switch between synchronous and asynchronous modes.
That's where the trouble begins.
That seemingly harmless tweak is like the first step on that slippery slope.
Oh.
Then someone else comes along and says, well, you know what would be really great?
Oh.
What if this function could also handle different data formats?
Oh, no.
Before you know it, this once simple, easy-to-understand function
Right.
has morphed into this behemoth of nested loops and conditional statements, and it's just this big monster.
It's like async task got put through, like, a coding Frankenstein experiment. And it's not just, like, harder to wrap your head around, but I'm guessing it's scarier to change too, right?
100%. This is what Hun actually refers to as inertia
Oh,
in the
cool.
post.
Oh, interesting.
Developers are terrified to touch this thing because the risk of breaking something is so high.
So it's kind of like a ticking time bomb in your code base. No one wants to set it off.
You got it.
So this is where the whole like human element comes in.
Absolutely.
Like nobody wants to be the person who's like, well, I don't understand this code. I'm not smart enough to get this
An exact.
super complex abstraction that we've built.
And then it becomes this like badge of honor to understand it,
Yeah.
which makes it even scarier for like junior developers or people who are new to the team.
Totally. And then they just avoid it like the plague, even if
Yeah.
it means copying and pasting code, which we already decided was bad.
Exactly.
So we've come full circle.
It's a vicious cycle.
It's like a self-perpetuating cycle of just fear and complexity. So if over-DRIing can lead to these tangled webs of code, how do you even strike that balance?
Right.
Like, is there a way to embrace weightness without sacrificing efficiency?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
And you know, it's interesting. Different programming languages actually have different philosophies on this.
Really? So like some are more pro-DRY and some are leaning into the wet side.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, I'm intrigued. So give me an example. Like what's a pro-DRY language?
So a great example would be Java. It's known for its robust frameworks, its emphasis on object-oriented programming, which encourages a high degree of abstraction, which makes sense if you're trying to build reusable components. Avoid writing the same code over and over again.
Right. But that's where I'm guessing these really complex abstractions can kind of creep in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even something as like seemingly straightforward as handling an HTTP request.
Okay.
Like, you know, the kind of request your web browser makes when you visit a website
Right.
that can turn into this labyrinth of servlets, interfaces, abstract classes, all these things in Java.
Okay, so even if your goal is to keep things DRY, the way that something like Java is structured might inherently make it, I don't know, like harder to wade through the code. Is it accurate at all?
100%. It's like trying to find a single sock in that hyper-organized, color-coded sock drawer we talked about.
Right, exactly.
Everything has its place,
Right.
but it's going to take you twice as long to actually find what you need.
And time equals money in the coding world,
Right.
right? Or at least like, efficiency is important.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if Java is like the poster child for DRY, what's on the wet end of the spectrum? What's a language that's really embraced that?
So a really great example would be Go,
Okay.
also known as Golang.
Mm-hmm.
It's a newer language that's been getting a lot of traction.
Okay.
And one of its core philosophies is clarity is better than cleverness.
Ooh, I like that. Okay, so it's less about those like crazy intricate abstractions and more about just like being straightforward,
Exactly.
even if it's a little repetitive.
Go actually encourages the use of code generation.
Okay, so like automating some of that stuff.
Yeah, so instead of you spending hours trying to craft this like perfect, super efficient, all-encompassing function, you can actually just have the language generate those repetitive bits for you.
Okay, so it does some of that work for you.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. So this whole like shift towards code generation and languages like Go, would you say that's like a fundamental shift in how people are thinking about this stuff?
Absolutely. It's a recognition that developer time is precious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that sometimes a little bit of weakness up front can lead to a healthier, more maintainable code base in the long run.
And not to mention, like, if you have code that's clear and straightforward, it's easier to like onboard new people.
100%.
You're not trying to like, decipher someone's cryptic message from, 6 months ago.
Exactly.
So it's not just about writing efficient code. It's also about, I don't know, maintaining your sanity as a developer. Like it's got to be like understandable by humans too.
It's about recognizing that software development is a human endeavor.
Yeah.
And that code is not just meant to be executed by computers. It's meant to be read by other humans.
Yes. It's like elegant and empathetic. I love that.
Exactly.
So as we're kind of like wrapping up here,
Sure.
what are some like key takeaways for our listeners? Like how do they actually like, put this into practice?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Whether they're working in Java, Go, or anything else, like what are some things to keep in mind?
So the source actually offers some really practical advice.
Yeah.
One of the most important things is to focus on testing the functionality of your code.
So like, does it do what it's supposed to do?
Yes.
Not just like, how pretty is it?
Right, because it's very easy to get caught up in the weeds of making your code super DRY. But If at the end of the day it's not functioning correctly, it doesn't really matter.
Like that old saying, don't put the cart before the horse. It's like, don't prioritize abstraction over functionality.
Love that.
Okay, cool.
And then another really crucial tip is to resist that urge to abstract too early in the process.
Okay.
Like, wait until you see clear repeating patterns.
Okay, so don't be afraid to get a little wet at first, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's better to write things out explicitly, even if it feels a little repetitive.
So it's kind of like, don't be afraid to, like, date your code before you marry it.
Right.
Like, get to know it,
I like that.
see if it works, and then you can decide, like, do we make this a more permanent, abstract relationship later on?
That's great.
And, I mean, if you've already, like, gone down that road
Yeah.
and you've created this abstraction and it's more trouble than it's worth, like, it's okay to refactor, right? It's okay to break up with that code.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to refactor, simplify.
Sometimes you need a little weightness. Okay, this is great. This whole conversation has been, like, eye-opening for me. Like, I always thought of DRY as, like, this hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
And now I'm kind of seeing it more as, like, a guideline, like a starting point.
That's a great way to put it.
And that sometimes, like, a little weakness might actually be the key to code that's, I don't know, like, enjoyable.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, you spend hours staring at this stuff. It should be at least somewhat, you know?
Absolutely. Happy developers, better code,
Right.
and sometimes that means embracing a little bit of repetition for the sake of, clarity and maintainability.
Totally. So next time I'm, like, tempted to spend, like, 3 hours building the most elegant abstract solution, I'm going to ask myself, am I doing this for the code or for my ego?
There you go. I love that. And if the answer is the latter, maybe it's time to get a little wet.
Exactly. Well, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for, like, diving into this with me. This was great.
Yeah, this was a fun one.
It's cool how these, like, seemingly simple, principles can spark such, like, nuanced conversations.
It's true.
Well, on that note, we'll leave everyone to ponder the balance of DRI and wet in their work and maybe in their lives. Who knows? Maybe a little strategic repetition is the key to a happier existence.
Maybe so.
All right. Until next time, everyone, happy coding.
Happy coding.
And remember, it's okay to get a little wet every now and then.